Today we're going to install the big blue filter. Depending on what system you bought, depends on how this will be packaged. If you bought this as part of another system, it'll possibly come in the boxes of that system. If you buy it as an individual unit, it'll be packed as you'll see today. The first thing we want to do is obviously take it out of the packaging. These filters are packed in a way that they do not get damaged in shipment. There'll be peanuts and whatnot around there, so you might want to do this in an area where you can easily clean these peanuts up, possibly dump them into a trash bag, something like that. I usually just take the filler housing out first and kind of shake it and let the peanuts fall back in. Everything you need will be in this white box. The rest of this is just merely for packaging to help protect it. Once you have the white box out, we're going to open it up. And you can use a razor knife or whatever. I found what's close to me. You will get the bracket that will be individually wrapped. With that bracket will come mounting screws, and these screws are used to mount the bracket to the filter. The screws that you will use to mount the filter to the wall will be supplied by you, depending on what your wall covering is. There's so many different types of wall covering, it's too tough for us to try to send screws for every type. Then you can pull the filter out. And the first thing you want to do when you pull the filter out is spin the top off. And you will see an O-ring inside there. And if you ordered this with a filter, a lot of times we'll ship the filter with the housing. You always want to take this off and make sure this filter doesn't have the plastic on it. I've already removed the plastic from this one, but we may send it with the plastic on there just to help protect the filter during transit. But always take this off and check and make sure the filter has no plastic on any end or on the side. Once you have that done, you can move the filter over to the side, and also you can move the sump over to the side. Now, on top of the housing, there's stampings that say in or out. Depending on how your plumbing runs, depends on how you'll mount this. Obviously, if we're coming in from your left, we'll put the in on the left. Just the opposite for a right-hand feed. So keep that in mind when you put the bracket on, because that's going to make a difference on how this mounts to the wall. For this particular case, we're going to assume that the water comes from left to right. So we're going to install the bracket this way. The bracket will fit right over top of the pressure relief button. This button I'll explain later, but those actual cutouts will fit on both sides of that, and you'll see all 4 holes line up. This will come with stainless steel screws and washers. These are stainless for the sole purpose that they will not rust if they get wet. And they are self-threading screws. So what you're going to do is just kind of start them with your hand. Putting a washer on each screw. Once you have them started, then you can tighten them down. Now you can use a ratchet, you can use a wrench, whatever you have. I have a drill with a socket on it that I'm going to use just so it's quick for this video. If you do use a drill, make sure you turn the setting down in a way that you're not going to strip these screws out when you run them in. I actually need to turn it up a little bit because it didn't seat all the way. Now once this is mounted, you should have no space between the housing and the bosses that you screwed in. Once you know you have that completely screwed down tight, then we can proceed to mount this to the wall. Now when you mount this to the wall, you want to keep several things in mind. First of all, you're going to have to change this filter, so you don't want to put this in an area that's going to make it really tough to do later. Also, when you mount this, you got to keep in mind the sump that you have on the bottom, because you have a 20-inch filter. If we mount it too low to the ground, we'll never get the sump on it, so you just kind of keep in mind where that's going to be. For this purpose, we're going to mount it kind of high so we can see what's going on, but just keep that in mind. You have a sump here that you have to be able to pull off, pull out, and change the filter. Once the filter house is mounted, now we can run our plumbing in and out. This particular housing is a 3/4 inch housing, so we'll be using 3/4 inch fittings. You can get these in 1 inch as well as 1.5 inches. Today we're going to use some John Guest quick connect fittings, and we're going to kind of show the different types of pipe you can use with those fittings. These are the fittings with the 3/4 inch thread. We're going to wrap these with Teflon tape. You want to do this in a clockwise motion. And when you tape these, don't be afraid to put tape on there. You want to make this a good seal. You don't want to have to go back and fix this later. So I usually put a generous layer on there, probably 10 to 15 wraps. Once that's done, you can screw the fittings in. Wrap your next fitting, again in the clockwise motion. Screw your next fitting in. Screw it in until it's snug hand tight. If it doesn't snug hand tight, you don't have enough sealant on there. You have to take it back off and put more sealant on it. Once you have it hand tight, then you're going to take your channel locks or your adjustable wrench and tighten it up to where it's nice and snug, not going to leak. Now this is a plastic housing, so obviously if we're putting in copper or stainless steel or anything like that, you want to be careful how far you run that in. You can crack this housing. You also want to be very careful that you don't cross thread it, because once you cross thread it, it's going to be really difficult to get this to seal once again. So take care to make sure you don't cross thread it. Make sure you have it tight, but don't over tighten it and crack it. Once the fittings are installed, you can install your pipe. You'll make sure your lock collar is loose by turning it counterclockwise. Then you can use either CTS copper, you can use PEX, or you can use CPVC. In this case, we're going to use PEX and copper in conjunction with this filter. You're going to push the pipe in until you feel it hit the O-ring. Push it the final bit. Tighten down the lock collar. Now that the fitting's secure, the O-ring does the work, and it's in place. The good thing about these is if you want to take the fitting loose, you can unloosen the lock collar, push in on this collet, hold the collet in, pull the pipe right back out. But we're going to push it in, we're going to lock it down so it's ready for use. This is a 3/4 inch PEX line. Will fit the same fitting. You're going to put it in the same way, unloosen the collar, fill the O-ring, seat it completely, tighten the lock ring. Now you have your pipes in and out. It is a good idea to put in T's and pressure gauges. If this is a continuous operation, you may want to put a bypass loop in so you can bypass this and change the filter without shutting down your operation. Regardless, a pressure gauge before and after will help you determine when this filter needs to be changed. We use what's called pressure differential, which is the difference between the two gauges. Your incoming gauge is always going to be a higher PSI than your outgoing gauge because we have the restriction of the filter. As the filter becomes plugged, that outside pressure starts to come down. What we're looking for is somewhere around 10 to 12 psi differential between the two is when we would change this filter. So if you have 60 here and 48 here, then it's about time to change it. Once you get to 15 psi differential, it's really going to be inhibited and you'll be forced to change it then because you'll have water pressure issues and things like that. Now, if you use these pleated filters and we're just using it for sediment and we're not using it for other contaminants such as oil or iron and things like that, a lot of times iron will plug these up. But if it is merely for sediment, you can take these out and rinse them off and reuse them. You may get 2 or 3 years out of these. What a lot of people will do is they buy an extra filter and they leave it on the shelf. They swap this out, put the new filter in, take the old filter out, clean it off really good, put it in a plastic bag, and then do the same thing again when they change it again and just keep rotating these. Now eventually you'll get large separations like this, or you'll get to where they swell up, or the material seems like it's starting to break down. At that point is when you would change it. But as long as it's just for sediment, you can really use these for a really long time. Now, once we have this mounted, it's plumbed in, we know it's ready to go, we basically can put the sump and the filter on. Now, if this O-ring happens to be out, which it's going to be hard for me to, there it goes. If it happens to be out, we're going to want to grease this with some food grade silicone grease. Now, not only do you want to lube this O-ring, but you also want to put some on these threads. These threads, if you put some grease on there, this filter is going to come apart a lot easier when you go to change it. So I usually just put a little dab on here and work it with my fingers all the way around the O-ring till it's coated really well. Once it's coated well, and you're going to stick it right back into the slot. Make sure it's completely flat all the way across. It shouldn't be bubbled up or sticking out anyway or twisted. Now once you've done that, then you can put your filter actually in the sump. Now if you look in the sump, in the bottom, there's a little tab, a little circular tab. It's kind of hard to see, but that little circular tab sticks up in the bottom, and it has what's called a sealing ring around it, which is the larger diameter. When you put this filter in, this center hole is going to go right over that tab, and then that seal ring is going to smash into this rubber, and that's what seals the end of this. So when you put this down in there, make sure it goes all the way in. If it's off, it'll be sitting up something like that. Should go all the way down in there to where it's in there somewhere around 1/4 inch from being flush. Once you've done that, then you can take your grease, and I put a healthy portion, but I just run it right here where the threads start. Just fill that little area up right there, and then when you tighten the filter down, that'll distribute that grease all the way around all the threads. Once the filter's in place, the filter will move around in there. But there's tabs inside of here, as you tighten it down, that will center this filter and allow it to fit on the same type of sealing ring that's on the top. So we're going to get in there and we're going to turn it counterclockwise, or I'm sorry, clockwise. And it should spin up by hand. If it doesn't spin up by hand, then you don't have it threaded right, or there's a malfunction or a defect, or you just need to put some grease on there to help lube it up a little bit. But once you get it on there and it's hand tight, then you can take the wrench that will be in the box supplied with the filter and go ahead and turn it about another 1/8 to 1/4 turn, and that's good enough. Now once this is in place, we can start to bring the water to it, and you'll hear it start to fill up with water. And as you do, that's when we use this pressure relief valve. This is just a spring-loaded valve that lets the air out of the chamber. So as it starts to fill up, you can push this down, you'll hear some air coming out. As soon as you see water squirt out of here, then you know the chamber's full and you can let go. Once this is full and pressurized, then you can go open up a line downstream and bleed the rest of the air out. The filter's installed now. Now, to replace this filter, you're going to do it in the same order, reverse, of course. We're going to shut the water off, and then we're going to relieve the pressure. If you don't relieve the pressure on this housing, you'll have a really hard time trying to get this bottom sump off there. It's real important that you relieve the pressure. So once you have the water shut off and you've opened something downstream and most of the water stopped flowing, then we're going to push this button again and relieve the pressure until no water comes out. And we know this housing has no pressure on it. Once it has no pressure on it, we can use the same filter wrench. Now we're going to put our hand up here just to keep from putting all the stress on the hanger. Turn it counterclockwise. And then if you put the grease on there, it'll spin right back off. If it's really hard and you got to wrench this all the way off, then you need to put more grease on it next time. Once you pull that down, you're going to take your old filter out. You'll remove your O-ring, lube it up again, put some more lube on your threads. Take your new filter, make sure you take it out of the plastic. Center it in the sump. Same thing again. You're going to spin this up by hand. You're going to tighten it hand tight. Take your filter wrench. Again, holding the top. Snug another 1/8 to 1/4 turn. Now the filter's been changed. And then you'll start it up the same way. You'll turn the water pressure on. You'll feel it start to fill up in here. Open your pressure relief valve until you get water. Release it. Then open up a faucet downstream and make sure you bleed all the water out of this filter. Or all the air out of this filter, I'm sorry. If you don't do that, this filter can have an air pocket in the top. And the water will just flow out of the bottom. So you're really only going to use half the surface area of your filter if you don't get the air out. So be sure you get the air out of this filter. It's really going to make a difference on how it performs. This is the installation of the Big Blue filter. Depending on what system you have, or if you bought this as a single unit, will depend on where it fits within your treatment system. If you have any questions on that, you can contact a customer service representative and they'll be able to help you with that. This should help you. If you have any other questions, you can just give us a call, 1-800-608-8792. Thanks.